All right, continuing on. This is part 2 of the Gun and Ammo's PowerPoint presentation. All right, so we've just covered a number of different weapons, semi-automatic revolvers, AR-15s, shotgun 12 gauge. But we're going to go into a little bit more basic understanding of calibers so that you hopefully have a good picture of weapons. Alrighty, I told you that most law enforcement, federal law enforcement officers carry semi-automatic handguns. They generally carry 9 millimeters, 40s, and 45s. It's different because it depends on the department. Each department hires their own range masters, sends them out to training. There are recommendations made by different manufacturers, IACP, which is the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and from there, the head of the organization makes their decision on what they want their officers to carry or what they allow them to carry. A lot of police departments today buy the handguns that the officer carries. Some don't. It depends on the union contract and collective bargaining. For example, when I started at my police department, I had to buy my own handgun, and it was expensive. I mean, back then it was about, I think, $600 or $700. Now our union has bargained so that new recruits don't have to come up with that and they are given the handgun. But when they leave that department for whatever reason, they do have to turn it back in. It belongs to the department. Okay, but that's these, when we refer to these calibers, we refer to generally the handgun that law enforcement carries. The 223 is the AR-15 caliber. 22 caliber I just like to talk about because for those of you that haven't shot, it's a good caliber to start with. And then you have your 12 gauge shotgun. Now, the reason I haven't put a name of a gun is there's different manufacturers. Just as there are different stores, Walmart, Target, there are different places to eat, there are different gun manufacturers. The main ones out there for law enforcement are Glock, Sig Sauer, H&K, Beretta, Smith & Wesson. Those are the main ones that are carried by law enforcement officers. All right, let's continue. Oh, really quickly. So, when you hear a gun and you say I carry a Glock 9mm or Glock 40, that is the manufacturer and you're talking about the caliber of a gun. So what does the caliber mean? Well, it all has to do with the measurement of the bore and barrel length. Remember, the barrel is on the gun. So therefore, there's a great mathematical equation, and it kind of tells you, you'll know the size of the bullet that can fit through the bore and barrel. So for example, your 22 caliber handgun has a barrel that's small, so your bullet's going to be smaller. 9mm, 357, and 45, so on and so forth. Shotgun. Remember, you heard me say it's a 12 gauge shotgun. That's what officers, law enforcement carries. But you also hear a lot of people that carry 20 gauge. Well, what does that mean? Basically, what it means, for example, in a 12 gauge barrel, the balls equal 1 pound. So therefore, that is the diameter of each one of the shot pellets or the balls that go in that can fit through the barrel. In a 20 gauge, those balls are smaller because you need a smaller inch diameter to equal the 1 pound. So therefore, if you look, as the numbers are larger, you have a bigger bore barrel size, and then this number gets smaller in the gauge, it's smaller. I, for example, have a 12 gauge shotgun. My mom actually has a 20 gauge shotgun that's smaller. And then I actually have a 410, and it's actually a handgun that fits in your hand, but it does contain a shot shell, which we'll talk about. All right, so going back now to ammunition. This is just kind of a look at the bullets. These are called cartridges, which we'll get into. But for example, you have a 22 bullet. See how small it is? And then you go up, and these are handguns for law enforcement. So this is 9mm, this is 40 caliber. And if you see, it says S&W and ACP. Those are different manufacturers again, but are different types of cartridges. But that's a 45, and then you get into your 12 gauge shotguns. All right. Just wanted to put the 22 there to show you that's a good size cartridge, and that is a good size to start out if you haven't shot before and you want to get into law enforcement. And the 9mm, 40, and 45 are handgun calibers that are carried by most law enforcement agencies. Okay, so you've heard me say bullet, don't call it a bullet. Well, we're going to find out why. Okay, This is not called a bullet, even though we always call it a bullet. It is actually called a cartridge. The reason being is if you get to a crime scene, and let's say there's been a shootout, and maybe the suspect's reloaded, and you found some of these on the ground, and then you found just some of the bullets that had been fired on the ground. If you just said bullet, if a person came back to look at the evidence, or a defense attorney, they could say, okay, what did you mean? A bullet? Or did you mean the actual bullet itself, which is just the top part? Okay, so let me kind of explain it. So in the whole cartridge, you have the casing, so the cartridge case. This is your black powder. This is your primer. And this is actually your bullet. This one has a copper jacket, just as you see here. Okay, so kind of looking at the side of it again, you have your, oh, sorry, this is, for example, 22s will come in different types of 22. So this 22 here, the cartridge case, is this. The bullet is at the top. It's only the top part. That's the only thing that comes through the barrel of the gun and goes out the end of the muzzle and hits your target. Inside the cartridge case, you have gunpowder, and then you have primer. And so therefore, when the hammer strikes the primer, it explodes the gunpowder, and the 22 is ejected out, lands on the ground normally, and the bullet goes out the muzzle. This is a rim fire 22, which basically means that the rim contains the primer and is crushed, and that is how this 22 bullet works. Again, the rim fire and the center fire showing you the difference of the cartridges. So the bullets are here. You have the brass casing on the outside that basically is just a container like a glass that holds something. You have your black powder, and then you have your primer here, or the primer along the rim. Right, now on shotgun shells, like for example the Remington 12 gauge shotgun shell, this is a kind of a look at the interior of that shell. So again, you have your brass correct here, you have your primer, you have your propellant over power wad, your shot wad is here, then you have whether it's a slug or tiny little pellets, and then you have your overshot wad, and then it's crimped to contain it all. Here's a side view of the shotgun shell again. So you have your primer, your gunpowder that explodes, your wad with shot cup. This is your slug here. These are your little pellets, and then it's crimped. The slug is not crimped. All right, we are going to stop here. This is part 2, and we will continue on with part 3 of Guns and Ammo. Click on the next video in the series. Thank you. See you at the next video.